afternoon, Servant Leader Church. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We welcome you all to be a part of this rectangle table discussion. So today we have Daughters of Purpose, or just a few members of Daughters of Purpose, the women's group ministry. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about 3 different women that's mentioned in the Bible. 2 of them that you're probably very familiar with, and one that you may have heard of but haven't really got into a deep discussion about, Sister Priscilla. So we're going to be talking about Priscilla and Esther and Ruth. And so we're just going to bring some points out about each lady that we're going to discuss to empower another woman, to empower a man, to empower you as you are watching with us this afternoon. So we have Sister Chitra, I'm Lady Pamela, and we have Sister Leandris, and we're going to be discussing 3 ladies of the Bible. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it. So our first lady that we want to talk about is Ruth, and we want to bring out some pointers of who Ruth is or was in the Bible, and what did she contribute? What did she do? What is it more than what we've already learned that we can gather from Sister Ruth? So what is those things, Sister Chitra, that you were able to find about Ruth that we probably have missed?
Yes, so looking at the life of Ruth, I think of a funny story that my sister told me, and she asked me, who was Boaz before he met Ruth? And I thought about it. I didn't know what to say, so I said, I don't know. And she said, well, he was ruthless. It's funny, but through the life of Ruth, God used her to bring the redemptive work back to himself, to start that redemptive process, because she was a Moabite. When Naomi went to Moab from Bethlehem of Judah, she left with her husband and her children, and they went to a different land. Then her husband died, the children died, her sons died, and Naomi was left with her 2 daughters-in-law, who were both Moabites, and she wanted to go back to her own land. And so when they left Moab, it's a long journey, and she was able to in taking a long journey, there's a lot of thoughts that go into it, and this is a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law relationship, and we know that that's not the most healthy of relationship, because it's one of the things that you highlight when you talk about relationship, and you say, oh yeah, that's mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, they will never get along. But here they were united in their grief, the loss of a child and a husband. And the grief united them, and they became close. And I don't know if they were able to get along before that, but after the death of the husband and the son, they were united. And because they had something in common, they had grief in common. And Ruth left her own people, her own land. And even in today's culture, like I grew up in Guyana, and I left there to come to the United States. I left my own land, and I know how difficult that can be, just moving from things that you're accustomed to and going into a place that it's a different culture. So with Ruth, she was from a different culture, but she was able to go to Bethlehem, Judah, and she was able to adapt to their culture. She left
and you
her
know
gods.
What? Right there, what I want to point out, when you look up Moab, those were descendants of Lot.
Yes.
And so during that time, they had a lot of ancestral type of relationship, brothers and sisters and all that type of stuff. And that was their character. That's what they did in Moab.
Yes.
And so for her to say, I don't want to go back to what I know. I want to embrace something that I haven't seen. I've only got a glimpse of it because I've been with Naomi. So I want to go on into this place where you're going, what you've called home. And so when you look at it even deeper, the children of Israel, where they were going to Bethlehem, Judah, they didn't get along with the Moabs. They were always feuding. And so that meant now you're going even further into a stranger territory where
Yes.
people may not receive you because they know what type of stock that you come from.
Yeah. And how people judge you based on where you come from and not what you bring to the table. And even in our world today, we're seeing that where people are being judged based on where they're from, based on the color of their skin, based on their culture. And Ruth was able to overcome all of that with being faithful and being close to Naomi. And she had that such a closeness to Naomi that it's one of the relationships that we all say that, you know, there's a song, bind our hearts together like Jonathan and David and like Ruth and Naomi. So just coming from a mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship to one that's being highlighted as one of the best relationships, it's different that, you know, and when they were living their life, they didn't know that it was going to be chronicled and passed down through the ages. Mm-hmm. They were just going about their life. So it tells a lot of her character. And one of the things that was highlighted was her faithfulness. And she was, she made an impact because she was able to go into a field of people who are different from her, and she stood out not just because of what she looked like or her culture, mm-hmm. but the person she was, the way she carried about herself. So even in a strange land, even when we're placed in situations that we're not accustomed to or we're not comfortable with, we can still be ourselves and be faithful, be the way God called us to be. So you don't have to be confirmed, you know, as how the world would want you to react, how they would want you to act, and what they want you to say or do, but you can be different and you stand out not because you did something bad, but because of your faithfulness or your commitment or your hardworking personality. And that's what Ruth showed us, that when she was working in the field with Boaz, she got Boaz's attention. Not because he may have seen her beauty, but that wasn't all that attracted him to her, that he noticed about her. He noticed that she worked hard. And that's the report that he received. She worked from morning till night, and she would only stop just for a few minutes to get something to eat. And then he asked, you know, have her come with my maidens and have her work with them. And I wonder how that was for her, you know, going into, and we know that women, when we get together, sometimes we don't always appreciate another person and we look at them differently because of where they're from or their culture and things like that. But they could have probably been saying, oh, she's a gold digger, or, you know, things like that. Mm-hmm. And who does she think she is, that she comes in from this other country and she's put at this table to eat with us. And they probably were saying all kinds of things, but she ignored whatever she was told or whatever they said about her, and she rose above the circumstances that she was in.
Can you talk more about, I want to back up for a moment there, to talk more about being in that strange place, and really having to overcome where you are. You know, you're bringing what you have, but now you're on a God assignment.
Yes.
Let's bring it more like present day. And we say we're on a God assignment. God has assigned us to go somewhere, to do something in a strange place that's strange to us, but he knows all about it. And that we may not be as comfortable with the assignment because, you know, now we must move beyond what we know and what we've become comfortable with. And we may not have a Naomi per se to go with us. We may have to go and then we're meeting up with a Naomi. So can you talk more about that from experience or
Yes.
some thoughts?
So coming from a different country, there are things that you read in books and that would prepare you for certain things. Like I was in Connecticut, and I knew that there was going to be snow sooner or later. So I'm prepared in every sense that you can be prepared for snow. I was prepared for that, but things that I wasn't prepared for was the little, like saying good night. Good night in Guyana was a goodbye, or a greeting. It was a greeting, and then here it was like the ending of the day. So there were little things that I couldn't get accustomed to. Like when I grew up in Guyana, certain denominations women did not wear pants, and those were things that I needed to get accustomed to. And now it's different, but it was just cultural things, or just little sayings. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, somebody leaves work and they say, "Have a good night." I'm like, it's not dark out. Why are they saying night? So these were things that I had to get accustomed to, and something as simple as people saying, "Oh, she went out." Now, for me, went meant you've already returned. I would have said she's gone out instead of she went out, because went for me meant that the person is back. So it was the little things, and I'm sure that there were little things and there are big things, and Ruth did not have Google to tell her, what to expect.
Hey, Google.
You're right. She couldn't say, "Hey, Google, what's the temperature in, Atlanta, Georgia?" And and what are the culture, what are some of the things that I need to expect? So she had to do it on a daily basis, and she had to learn to listen to Naomi. Today, we may not have a Naomi. We have Google, but we don't have a Naomi. And that's, where us as women, we can nurture each other, that you can be a guide to that person and say, okay, here is something that I went through, and this is how I dealt with it. And we impart that experience, that person does not necessarily have to make the same mistakes or learn from their own experiences, but they can learn from another person. And as older, not old, but older, or more mature women, we can exhort the younger generation. We can teach them things, and we can also learn from them, because Ruth was young. She was still very young, and Boaz was older, but yet she was able to find favor in his sight. And sometimes somebody can come into the church and we can see them, and instead of judging, hey, look at the clothes that they're wearing, that could be all the clothes that they have. But then we come alongside them and we say, hey, and we just become a friend to them, and they would open up eventually and tell us, hey, this is what I'm going through. And you get to learn about people's life from just being associated with them, and you can make an impact on their life.
And can I add one thing?
Yes.
The thing with Ruth having humble beginnings and coming from a place that was not valued, but then she was the lineage of David, who was the king. So we don't know, when we encounter people, what the future is for that person, and the greatness that they are carrying that won't be revealed until much later.
Yes.
That is true. That's true. The greatness that they carry. Speak more to that about the greatness, because some people don't understand that they are carriers of greatness themselves, and that they have something to offer to others that they come in contact with. They just feel themselves as going day to day, but not really understanding you do have something that you can offer to the world. You may not have tapped into it completely, but there is something inside of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when, particularly women, when they internalize what the society says about who you are, what your possibilities are, and depending on who you are around, your peers, the adults you're around, they can either inspire greatness in you, or they can inspire mediocrity in you, or just being average in you. But I think in order to be great, you have to first of all have something in you that recognizes that. And it has to be nurtured, it has to be watered. And I think it also requires courage, and it requires the ability and the willingness to take a risk and to step outside of what's known. I know my grandmother, when I was growing up, she used to say, "You want to be somebody when you grow up." And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know who somebody was. I knew what it wasn't. And just over the course of my life, again, those doors that would open and I would walk through them having no idea what was on the other side, but having enough self-confidence to just do it. And because it had been imparted in me that I was to be, quote unquote, somebody. And I think that that's available to all of us. And I think in the body of Christ, and as women who are to teach the younger women, that we need to do more of that. We need to call out that greatness in them and encourage them in their walk.
Definitely.
So true. So from Ruth, we can learn a lot more that she was humble and that she kept working even as God blessed her, because she went from a place of not having to now you're having.
Yes.
And being in a strange place and learning and adapting and adopting a lot of what she was taught from Naomi and the others that was around her. Just like you said, there was probably some naysayers. Well, who is this Moabite coming over here with us? Who she thinks she is, working in our fields and eating our food, and now she with Boaz? Who is this? So she had to overcome the naysayers and those that didn't like her. And I'm quite sure there was still some that, even though there was some that says she's really humble, she continues to work, there's still going to be some people that disagree with where you are. And so you have to be comfortable with embracing where God placed you. You have to become comfortable with that. If you elevate up, then you have to shift your mindset into the fact that I am now in this place and I belong here.
That's right.
This is where I belong. I have favor with Lord. I have favor with people that will seem unfavorable in places that I may not have ever went, but thank God for favor. So now I must embrace what is right in front of me.
Yes.
And you can't take everybody with you.
You cannot. You cannot.
And sometimes those separations are very painful, but they're necessary. And I think part of leaving, because I too left where I grew up,
Yes.
to come to a place, and I came from a family where people didn't leave, and I was like the outlier and they were like, my family thought I just couldn't settle down, which was really not it at all. But just being okay that not everybody will understand your walk or your destiny, but you love them anyway, and it's okay. It's okay because they'll come back around.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, it might be a little, uncomfortable.
Yes. Until they realize and they see where you are and what you've done and what you're doing, and then they get it. The aha light bulb moment comes on, and like, oh, okay, I see now. And that helps those that's around that had probably a smaller way of looking at things to see things now in a bigger light, in a bigger frame, and not to just keep it small, so that there is more outside the world. For me, I grew up in the country. There was no stoplights where I'm from, particularly where my house sit. You could walk to my aunt's house, but it was going to take you at least 15 minutes, and that was considered exercise. And so my dream of seeing more of the world was, for me, during my era, was the Cosby Show, or a different world, because it showed me there is more than just the country sticks. And so you can embrace that. You can go for it. But then even as I've grown in my career, I understand that, like you said, everybody can't go, and it's like crabs in a bucket. Somebody's going to try to pull you back and pull you down. I'm quite sure Oprah was like, really, Naomi? Really, Ruth? This is how we're going to do this? She was tearful, but she probably wanted Ruth to come back too. Come on, girl, you know this is what we do. This is what we know. This is our home.
Yes.
We were married. We're no longer married. So why not go back? But Ruth had to come to a determining factor. I want more. There's more to life than just going back home.
And also, I think one of the very popular scriptures in Ruth is when she said to Naomi, wherever you go,
Right.
I will go.
Yes.
And your God will be my God.
People, my people.
And I think that she made that quality decision.
Yes.
That, as Chitra was saying, that Naomi's people would be her people, but I think ultimately her God
Yes.
would be her God.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm embracing it all.
Yeah.
I'm embracing it all.
And I wonder if she knew at the time that she was going to be the grandmother of David. And through that lineage, here comes Jesus down the line to redeem all of mankind. And she had no way of knowing that. But in her obedience, God honored that. And her faithfulness, he honors faithfulness. So, and through her, and that lineage, everything, we see the evidence of it now, that, there's Obed and Jesse and David, and then down the line you have Jesus, who just came in man form, in the form of man, and redeemed all of mankind. So what would have happened if she had not gone with Ruth? I mean with Naomi, but I'm sure the Lord had made provisions. What if she didn't choose that to have somebody else? But when we look at our own life, what greatness is there in our life, and what is the next generation going to see from us, and what do we have to offer? And even like in our prayer group, I mean, when Pastor Akeem said, "Go ahead, you're leading it," and then one day I'd go, "I can't do this. I can't lead this team because I didn't discern something." And I said to Pastor Akeem, I cannot do this. And he said, "I will not let you go back on your calling." So thank God for people in our life who push us, just like Naomi pushed Ruth into finding her destiny and doing what God created her for. So we can do the same and find what God created us for. And you have people around you who would push you into that and say, "This is what God called you for, and I am going to stand by you. I will be there for you. I will hold your hands up." And that's what we can be to the other generation, hold their hands up, hold their hands and walk with them until they don't need you anymore. And you're in their life for just a season, and we have to be content with being in somebody's life for just a season, the season that they need us. And then we move on, they move on, and they do what God created them to do. And we go on to do the things that God created us to do.
Good point. Good encouragement for the next young lady or that will come up behind us to be encouraged to know that God will help you. There are people that will help to push you into your destiny, into greatness. So let's journey on a little further into the Bible, and let's see what Sister Esther has to offer to our viewing audience this afternoon. So Esther's name means star. And before Esther actually came into being the queen, her name was Hadassah. And so she was a Jewish woman. And so her name being Hadassah, coming into this Parisian place, meant that now my name must change. I must hide and conceal my identity because, Jews were not always favored. And so she changes her name as she enters into becoming the queen. In the process of Esther, she became into that place because of Vashti. Vashti became she became a little haughty. I won't say disobedient. She got a little haughty in herself. The king had called for her to come to show off her beauty. And I guess she had one of those sister girl moments and like, I'm not coming out there. And so she did not. She didn't come out. The king got very upset and angry, but then he started to think about it and say, well, maybe she had a moment. But then there was others around him saying, well, if she had this moment, she'll have another moment. Mm-hmm. And so that opened the door for maidens to come into the kingdom and begin to go through a process. And so the process that they had to go through was a beautification process. And it was a year-long process, milk baths and learning of the role that they would possibly one day be in and understanding what the king liked, did not like, and when to speak, when not to speak. That whole 9 yards that they had to do as they were going through the process. But because of Esther's beauty, she and the favor that she had gained, she was able to come to the king prior to the time frame. But even though she came to the king, that wasn't the end. Mm-hmm. She may have got to sit at the table for the moment, but she still had to go back to be a part of the process that was for her destiny. So sometimes you may have to, you come to places and you get to see a glimpse and actually partake of the glimpse that God has for you, and then he may send you back to complete the process that you've already started, because he knows there's some other things that he needs to put in or remove out, some things that he needs to ensure that you're ready for the position once you fully get there. So she had to embrace the fact that, okay, I've got to talk to the king. Now I must go back with the other ladies and go through this year-long process of beautification. So as we go on with Sister Esther, she is put into a position where she becomes the queen. Mm-hmm. But now there's Mordecai, her cousin, and Haman. He's put in a place, Haman is put in a position where he's like the second man in charge, and people must bow down to him when they see him. But Mordecai says, no, I can't do that. I'm a Jew, and that's not how we do that. And so because he did not bow, now there is war. Everybody must be banished. He puts out this order for all the Jews to be killed. And so Mordecai gets in wind of it. And so by him getting in wind of it, he goes to Esther. Now you have the ear of the king. Mm-hmm. You have to step in, or it's going to be our people's head on the chopping block. You have to step in. And so I can imagine for Esther, going through this year-long process, learning the ways of where she is, she's probably had to say, okay, wait, do what? Mm-hmm. You want me to do what? I don't know if I have the capabilities. I know what I can and cannot do. But because she was taught and she was being led by the Spirit, I believe, that she knew how to strategically move when it was time to move. She wasn't over, anxious and saying, okay. No, let's take a back. Let everybody know we got to fast. Mm-hmm. So that we can hear with clarity when the Lord speaks, so that I can know what I need to do, because I got to be strategic. I got to make sure that I'm in the timing that God would have for me to operate in, and I'm not outside of the frame that he has for me. So anything that you ladies want to add about Esther?
Yeah, I wanted just to say that, and to make it contemporary, where many young women aspire to a high place, to be the queen, to have a particular position, to be seen. But it comes with a big price. Mm. And that's what I don't think everyone is always cognizant of. I'm thinking about the scripture says to count the costs. Mm-hmm. So it's a great thing to be the queen and the preferred wife of the king, but it literally was going to cost her life, mm-hmm. Or her willingness to put her life on the line. And I think that that's what's really significant. I think for all of us today, that a few things, when we are called into a position, it's going to cost us, but we also can't come into it without prayer, mm-hmm. and without being part of a body of believers and a body of praying people, men and women, so that at that time when we have to pay a price, we can go in with the confidence of we know that we're covered and that God sent us, and that whatever it is He called us to do, it's going to happen in the way that He needs it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important for being an Esther.
Yes. And to your point about stepping into a role, something I highlighted, understanding your role, power, and position will be key to your next steps. Mm-hmm. So if you understand where you are, then that will be key into how you begin to step. If you don't embrace the fact that, yes, Esther, you are the queen and you do have His ear, and you can begin to orchestrate some things and begin to see some stuff happen that saves our people, then we are going to pretty much be wiped off.
Yes.
We're going to perish. So she had to come to grips after this process, a year-long process of, okay, I am a woman in position, I'm a woman in power, and I understand my role. And now I understand even more how I'm going to use my role to make sure that I help my people. Mm-hmm. That's something that I've had to learn even on my job, that as an assistant director, I have to make sure that I understand my role, understand I have a voice, and understand the power in which I have and operate in to be a help to those that I am going to encounter on my job. So that's a process within itself.
Yes, and that season of preparation that she had to go through was very important because she had to learn new things. And here she was in a strange land, just like Ruth was.
Yes,
you know, that they're both away from where they grew up. And in Ruth's case, she was being returned to where God is and where there was prosperity. In Esther's case, she was away from her own people, who God is their God and King, and she's in a different place. So that different place, and we all know that when you're placed in something that you're not comfortable with, you have to be able to adapt and understand what your role is. Mm-hmm. And that understanding comes with a price. That here, when she decided that I'm going to go to the king, and if I perish, I perish. Mm-hmm. And she was willing to do that, but she understood that she had found favor. Mm-hmm. And when we know who we are in Christ, we can take a stand. And it's not just in the spiritual realm, but we can do that in our workplace when we know. And in different places, in different situations, when we are confident in who we are in Christ, we can take that stand and know that when we stand for what God wants and what His purpose is, that He will stand with us, and we will be validated in that way. So, and I think she knew that she had that favor, and she knew what God was preparing her for. And even though it wasn't the time that, she didn't know whether He was going to hold that scepter out to receive her or not.
Right.
But she did it because she was confident in who God is and who she is in Him.
True. Very true. Very true. So she had to understand timing and listening. Yes. And following directions, which is really very key. So Esther was a woman that she knew what she had to do. She was positioned in a place that would later help a nation of people. So she had to understand her position. Again, understand the position. And then understanding that she had to lean on the Lord, because when you go through the book of Esther, God's name is not mentioned, but you just know that His presence is there. His name is not, when you go through the Bible, it says Lord or Jesus or something of that nature to let you know that He was there. But when you go through Esther, you can just see how God is there. Although He may not be mentioned, He's still there. So there are maybe some times in your life where it may just seem like He's not there, but He is there. His presence is there, because he will give you direction. He will give you guidance. He'll begin to set some things into place, and then they begin to fall into place like clockwork without you even realizing, okay, this is happening just for me, just like this,
Yes.
just like this. So I know that God is with me. And so Esther and Mordecai had to know that God was with them, although his name is not mentioned. But you begin to see how things fall directly into place for them.
And as you're saying, Lady Pam, I think all of us have Esther moments where we have to say, if I perish, let me perish. I'm going to use whatever the place I'm in, whatever my sphere of influence. It could be on your street. It could be in your home. It could be in your church. That you're going to be willing to use that for the uplifting of the people who are around you and the people you care about. And I think we're really in that moment right now, in our own society, where we're going to have to take some uncomfortable stands, but know that God is with us, that he's gone before us, and that he knew that this day would come.
Yes.
So we embrace Esther and all that she's taught us. We embrace Ruth and all that she taught us. Both women of different backgrounds coming into places where they've had to learn to embrace something new and how to trust God. So if you see the foot pattern is trusting God in these places, trusting God in what he's called you to do, and begin to believe that God has you, that he's for you, that you are victorious, and that you will win. You may come through some persecution. You may face some times where some trials, but know that God is present help. He is a present help, and that he is with you. So let us journey on a little further into our Bible discussion of our ladies, and let's talk about Priscilla, a name that you may hear but not really get into a deep study about. Most of the times, from what I've read, when you read about Priscilla, you're gonna hear about Aquila. And so, Sister Leandris, tell us more about Priscilla.
Yeah, so Priscilla is one of our New Testament women, and she was married to a man named Aquila. And I think you see Priscilla and Aquila mentioned all of maybe 4 times in the New Testament, but they were a couple who actually, they were exiled from Rome, and they landed in Corinth. And Corinth was a major commerce center at that time. And but it also was a city that was known for its wickedness and immorality. But they came to Corinth. They were both tent makers, and that's how they met Paul. Paul was also a tent maker, and so they worked together, but they also went into ministry together. And my understanding, from some of the scholars, is that Paul's tent making was essentially pay for his life expenses, but his primary purpose was to be there to minister the gospel. And so I think Priscilla was, I think in a contemporary sense, a woman who was doing it all. She was married. She had a career as a tent maker, but she was also a leader in the church. And she was known, she and her husband, and I think it's not inconsequential that you always hear about them together, right? So that they ministered together, they worked together, of course they lived together. And clearly they shared the same values because they were given to hospitality. We read that Paul lived with them for 18 months. She was very dependable. She worked with Paul in the trenches, which meant that there were times when I'm sure she came under public attack, even as he did. But she was described as maintaining a good attitude and not being a complainer. And Paul mentored her and Aquila, but then she in turn mentored others.
Yes.
So she was also, I think, interestingly, not only a leader in the church, being a woman in that day, but also described as a preacher. So she went about with her husband and with Paul, ministering throughout Corinth, but also several other places, like where they went to Ephesus, and also they ministered in Rome. And then the last thing I'll say about her is that she and her husband then became mentors of Timothy. So I think her lineage, I don't recall that she had children, but the role that she played in Timothy's life, which then helped him in his ministry, also carries forward to today.
Yes, and here again is someone who was outside of where they grew up, and that's one of the things that all three of these ladies had in common, that they were called to serve and outside of where they grew up, and they had to make changes in. I'm sure she had to make some adjustment from being in Rome and rather than in somewhere else, every place else that she's been, and she was. It wasn't very often that you would hear about women about them preaching or teaching, but here she was like a trailblazer.
That's right.
As a teacher and a preacher, and she worked in ministry alongside with her husband. So that was interesting.
She was special,
Yeah.
for that day.
Yeah.
And she was known to encourage others in their walk,
Yes.
with Christ. And they traveled a lot.
Yes.
And so she had to be flexible and to kind of move with the flow of the ministry.
So she wasn't a woman that got planted. You put some roots down, but like you saying, Sister Leandra, she was flexible. And she understood that movement was progression. I have to move around because this is what ministry is calling for me to do. I got to be willing to pack up my tent, and sometimes having to flee from where she was and not be able to get everything that she wanted to get, but to start again when necessary, because she understood the ministry in which she was in and the call that was on her and Aquila's life, what they had to do. This is what she signed up for. And it's kind of like being a missionary in a sense. That you could say Priscilla was a missionary, because they went from place to place. They helped to build. They even started a church in Corinth. That's what Paul wanted them to do, start a church in their home. So they helped to assist, to help Paul, help Apollos, and to carry out the mission of a church themselves.
That's right.
So they were like present day
Church planters.
That's right.
Church planters and missionaries, and carrying apostolic, because they had to go in to build up. And I'm quite sure as they were working, there were some things that they had to begin to tear down, because it says that they built the church in Corinth, even though it was unpopular in Corinth, a place where, Paul writes to the church of Corinth, and he's writing to the Corinthians and giving instructions to help get them back on track. And so they were still able to make it grow and to flourish, even in the place that they were.
Yeah. And because of her personality, she was able to bring correction in the church and have it be received. So that was also, I think, significant, as a woman. And I think that God will endow us with certain personality traits that we can go into difficult places, bring correction, have it received, and have it done in love.
So, Servant Leader Church and those that's watching with us this afternoon, we pray that you were able to gain something from our three ladies, that as Sister Chitra expounded on Ruth and I spoke about Esther, and Sister Leandra has given us some insight on Priscilla. We probably could go on and on about Priscilla, because she's such an interesting person, a woman of position, a woman of power and a woman of authority, just as we've described in all our ladies. We want to encourage you to know that you have power, that there is greatness on the inside of you, there is purpose, and there is a need for you in this present day and present time. Amen. Come from behind the rock, come from out of the place where you feel like there is nothing and that you are nobody. That is not true, because as you see, these ladies of the characters that we've talked about in the Bible, they had purpose and they embraced it. You can do the same thing, and we encourage you to do that as well. So if this is your first time joining us this afternoon, we want you to join us as we go into our area of worship, of giving. As you will see on the side of your screen, there is a number that you can dial. Text leader to the number that you see on the screen, and you'll be able to partake in worship with giving with Servant Leader Church. And also you can text the word power to the number that you see on your screen, and it will provide you with some more information about Servant Leader Church, who we are. You can find us on Play Store, our church app, Servant Leader Church, or you can go directly to the website, www.servantleaderchurch.org. We want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. Remember, we're on every Sunday at 12 noon. You all be blessed and have a good evening. Bye-bye. We love you.
Bye-bye.